Coming up, a new report highlights ways to support reproductive justice for Indigenous women. And Indian country commemorates a grim 2 years of COVID-19. Plus, we're breaking down President Joe Biden's first State of the Union address. I am Malia Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amirawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. As Russia rattles the West with nuclear threats, President Joe Biden faced a tougher-than-expected task in Tuesday's State of the Union address. Ukraine and inflation were two of Biden's major themes in his speech. The president mentioned Indigenous people once when speaking about affordable high-speed internet access. Many of the nation's top lawmakers were in attendance, as well as a Saginaw Chippewa citizen and educator, Melissa Isaac. A guest of First Lady Jill Biden, Isaac is working to expand mental health services for her nation's youth. Isabel Guzman is the leader of the Small Business Administration. She spoke to ICT ahead of the Tuesday address, saying that Biden knows investments in Indian country are a good thing for America.
When the president says that he wants to invest in the American people, he always says that it's never a good bet to bet against the American people. That includes Indigenous people. He knows that ideas come from everywhere and anywhere, including on our native lands.
Biden also spoke about his plan to break away from relying on foreign supply chains. A First Nation in Canada is releasing the findings of an investigation of unmarked graves at a former residential school. On Tuesday, the Capoweno First Nation says it discovered 169 potential unmarked graves at the former Groward Mission. The residential school is also known as St. Bernard Mission School. It was opened by the Catholic Church in 1894 and ran until 1961. Capoweno officials held back tears at a press conference on Tuesday.
Finding one grave is too much. Finding multi is incomprehensible. My thoughts, prayers go out to the families whose loved ones never made it home and who died at the hands of these so-called schools.
The tribal nation used ground-penetrating radar and specialized drones to search the grounds. Officials say they were prompted following the discovery of unmarked graves at another residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia. Chief Halcrow vowed to continue investigations, saying the 169 hits came from searching just 1 acre of the property. Well, the basketball arena was rocking in Phoenix, Arizona over the weekend. It was a White Mountain Apache team versus a Navajo team. And, well, we all know how fun basketball can get. ICT's Patty Tholahongwa shares all of the action, starting with the former Hopi team who got some time on the court.
This team from Hopi High was the first team to win a state championship for the school 25 years ago.
Let's give a warm welcome to the 1997 2A Conference champion, Hopi Bruins.
Next up, it was the epic showdown between Alchese and Chinle, as the game was called in both languages.
It penetrates the soul, and so when it's done in the Apache language, it hit home.
Udell Opa called the game in Apache. Ellie Williams gave us a sample of what the play-by-play sounds like in Navajo.
Fit like he came down and fit is a foul. Behind the three-point line, the shot was made that went in.
The crowd was wild from the tip-off.
Sanchez with the ball, now gives to Nosey. Nosey gonna drive, up off the glass.
Fans included royalty and elders who were on their feet. Chin Lee led the first period 21-10, but IHHS came back and led by 1 point at halftime. The announcers got an earful from fans as they called the game. And in the timeouts, a little group sing-along. The game went into overtime, tied 58-58. Both teams had their tribal leaders cheering them on. But in the end, the Falcons won by a score of 66-64. As L.A. Williams said in Navajo, it was a hard-fought game. In Phoenix, Patty Thalahunva, ICT News.
And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, we're discussing President Joe Biden's State of the Union address and COVID. But first, a new report examines the links between tribal sovereignty and body sovereignty. We'll speak with one of the authors when we return. 2 months ago, the Miss Foundation released a landmark report examining the limits placed on Native women's reproductive choices and the centuries-long impact of colonization. Rosebud Sioux citizen Koya Whitehat Artichoker is one of the report's authors. She joins us now to share some key recommendations from the report. Hi, Koya. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about the report.
Let's just jump right in. 1, tell us about this report, and 2, what are some of the major findings from it?
So the report was done in partnership with the Collaborative for Gender and Reproductive Equity, based here in New York City as well. And we were approached initially about, their primary focus as a collaborative is around supporting reproductive health rights and justice in the country. So we were initially approached about the project because as they were doing a sort of landscape analysis, it occurred to them that there was no national voice for Native women on reproductive justice issues. There was just a dearth, a complete lack of any sort of infrastructure, I guess is what we would say, much less an organization. But there were and there have been women doing this work as part of other work that they're doing around domestic violence intervention or alcohol and drug treatment or housing instability. Somehow, reproductive justice also becomes part of the conversation once you really delve into what are some of the issues that women are facing. So realizing that lack of national voice, they really wanted to investigate that and learn a little bit more about it. So they approached me as somebody who's done a lot of work in the reproductive justice field and who also happens to be a funder. So it was very, the report itself is unique in the sense that it is, a really large landscape analysis that hasn't been done before. But also in the sense that it's coming from philanthropy, and that's different. Because a lot of times you have people doing work in the field who are kind of knocking on the doors of philanthropy, trying to get some attention. And in this case, you have people inside philanthropy saying, we are recognizing a gap and in the need to address that gap. So we're going to investigate it further. We're going to document it, and then we're going to raise money for it. And so there is a goal to raise $10 million to help build some kind of needed infrastructure for Native women around reproductive health rights and justice in this country. So that's exciting.
A large analysis, a large landscape analysis is the perfect way to describe this report. Actually, one of the findings that surprised me was that there was a real gap in funding for Native reproductive services. Can you tell us about that gap?
Yes, there is, I think when we looked at the giving of the millions of dollars, and this is based out of the Ms. Foundation a couple years ago also commissioned a report called Pocket Change. And that report looked at the total giving of philanthropy across the board in the country that gives to women of color issues. And even amongst that small sampling, only about $9 million overall in the course of a year or more was given to Native women around reproductive health, rights, and justice. In a field where there's hundreds of millions of dollars that is flowing, it's really quite minuscule. It equals out to about 3% of total giving, which is about $3 million per 1%, right? So that is, given the amount of resources that exist out there, Native women are definitely getting we're getting short shrifted, for sure. And as the Pocket Change report said, women of color often do more with less. And I think Native women in this report really exemplifies that and embodies it. So.
Koya, let's talk about the timing of this report. Across the country, we're seeing so many headlines around the attack of women's reproductive justice rights. And of course, this report talks exactly about that. For Native women in particular, how does this report sort of fill in the gaps of all of the headlines that we're seeing right now?
I think that's a great question. And what really strikes me and what comes up for me a lot is that, a lot of women, particularly since the ruling in Texas, have been experiencing a sort of tightening of the circle of services around their reproductive health, rights, and justice. And for me, one of the things that I've been saying, and it's certainly not meant to be adversarial, but it's meant more to sort of highlight that Native women have been living that experience this whole time for quite a while, especially due to the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment bars any sort of federal dollars for being used for abortion care or abortion access. Most Native people access their health care through Indian Health Service. And because federal dollars cannot be used for those services, you cannot access abortion care or abortion services at any Indian Health Service facility, unless it's sort of an emergency. But so I think that creates a situation that looks a lot like Texas for most Native populations that are living on the reservation. It's different if you're an urban Indian and you're off the reservation, but then the struggle is really about the cost of healthcare, right? And we know that our people are generally living just around the poverty line or above it. So there are just significant barriers everywhere you turn. But I think that what we're realizing or what people are seeing on a national level is what that looks like when it affects white women. And not to be, again, adversarial, but I think a broader swath of women are experiencing the same sort of restriction on their rights that Native women have been living with the whole time.
Well, Koya, we could talk about this all day, but I hope that you'll visit us again to talk about this someday in the future. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Wednesday is the 2-year anniversary of the first believed COVID-19 death in Indian country. ICT editor Jordan Bennett Begay was leading this reporting at the time. She was collecting data from the Indian Health Service as well as reporting on numbers from tribal nations. Here's a clip of her reporting from April 2020.
So what's the latest numbers across Indian country?
Yeah, so as of last night, we have a total of 723 COVID-19 cases across the Indian health system and a total of 31 deaths. On the Navajo Nation, they had an additional 3 deaths that they reported last night. And what's also unique too, we counted a case that was from one Native person who was living in Washington, D.C. in the nation's capital. And what's unique about this person is that the District of Columbia is reporting like the ethnicity of data, and oftentimes a lot of health facilities aren't doing that right now, but we're still counting them in our database.
Wow, Jordan, what a way to reflect. What's going through your mind as you watch that clip back?
I remember the long days. If anything, at that point, there was really no database to record cases for American Indians and Alaska Natives. I mean, IHHS or the Indian Health Service was doing their best but people really wanted to see what was going on in their tribal communities and also their region and the big picture. Like, what does this mean and how is this affecting, all of Indigenous people in this country? And I really do remember just the long hours. And then at that point, I said there were about 31 deaths that we recorded in the database at that time. And just a couple weeks ago, the CDC released a report about now there's more than 10,000, deaths of American Indian and Alaska Native people. It is, very heartbreaking and sad because, for many reasons, right? But the fact that when you look at the data, that we are pretty much, a lot of experts say we are still very off. We don't have an accurate count of, Native people who died from COVID-19.
And to go back and to think that Wednesday, today, is the first believed anniversary of the first COVID-19 death of a Native person. I mean, it just really sends chills through your body, exactly how you just said, because we've lost so many other relatives since then.
Yeah, I know exactly. And I remember even just recording the deaths. And I can't imagine, I do remember one point in recording these deaths that I think I recorded 10 in one day. And at that point, I think it was like a total of 60. And I, as a human being, I broke down and started crying because I just couldn't fathom what was going on. Because, these are quality people, a lot of the people passed away are, storytellers, are knowledge keepers, are language keepers. There's so much that's happening in like Dean Seneca, epidemiologist, who I have been talking to over the course of the pandemic was saying, it's the quality of deaths that's happening here. But also, I think it goes to show that tribes are doing the best they can to prevent as many deaths as possible. They're closing their communities and still having mask mandates in place.
One of the main parts of ICT's reporting has been to holistically report on COVID-19. And it started with case numbers, then it went into the death count, and then it went into, vaccine rates and all of the mandates that have been in place. Talk about ICT's coverage and reflect on it over the last 2 years since we've been living through COVID-19.
Oh, definitely. We were looking at all aspects of it too. We're looking at the data. We're also looking at that time, that's when students were going into spring break. And then also thinking about not only Native students in colleges and universities, public and private, but also tribal colleges and universities and what that meant for remote working or also students who are studying abroad overseas. When are they going to come back? What does it mean for jobs and grocery shopping, and also recording, these deaths and capturing these individuals who passed away in our series called Portraits for the Pandemic or from the Pandemic. So it's really we've been trying our best to keep up with it, but of course, we get exhausted, but it's also a very important information we try our best to keep up with and to inform readers.
You've talked about this a little bit already, but talk about what tribal nations are going through now in the pandemic and maybe what areas of concerns they have in the present day.
Sure. So a lot of it, the CDC has been on and off again. You're just kind of hot and cold about mask mandates, but even then, tribes are seeing that, that mask mandates are so important in their communities. I mean, when I went home to visit on the Navajo Nation, where I'm from, you still are going into stores and still having to hand sanitize. So you still take temperature checks. You're still, trying your best to protect yourself, still wiping down groceries when you come back from home. And even in schools, kids are adapting to this. I feel like better than adults at this time. Because a lot of them are now, I know some kids, that I talk to, my own nieces and nephews are like, I don't remember a time before the pandemic, Auntie. And it just broke my heart, but that's the life they're living in now. I think tribes are still, continuing to encourage protecting themselves in every way possible. And also whoever comes into the community, they're really trying to follow protocols too.
Sure. Well, Jordan, thank you so much.
Thank you, IHHS.
President Joe Biden delivered his first State of the Union address on Tuesday night. The speech came as a war in Ukraine continued and a nation tries to heal from the pandemic. Joining us today is ICT regular contributor Holly Cook Macaro to break down the address and other topics. Hi, Holly.
Hi, Leah. It's good to see you.
So, at a very high level, tell us about the main topics and themes of President Joe Biden's State of the Union address.
Well, certainly to no one's surprise, he led off in talking about the war in Ukraine and the role that he expects to play, the United States to play, and it was really an extraordinary sign of unity. The chambers were somewhat empty, as if you were watching, you might have noticed. Usually, it's packed. We've got the Democrats on one side, on the Democrats on the left, the Republicans on the right, symbolically. As to the political leanings of each party. And it's usually quite a show of, stand up and clap or, express. So the emptiness of the chambers, I certainly thought was something that changed the dynamic there. But on Ukraine, there was unity. There was, I think, joint applause, joint support for what the president was saying. And that was extraordinary.
The other part that really struck me that really wasn't about policy was the Saginaw Chippewa citizen who was there with the First Lady, Jill Biden. And it seemed like everyone in Indian country immediately noticed her ribbon skirt.
Yes, and I think partly it was right at the front when they recognized the Ukrainian ambassador, and it was Melissa Isaac. I think you've put that out there from Saginaw Chippewa in Michigan, and but just a perfect view of that beautiful ribbon skirt that she had on, and a great representation that she was sitting with the First Lady in her viewing box.
As you mentioned earlier, one of the first shots that we got of her was when the Ukrainian ambassador stood up to be recognized. Let's actually talk about Ukraine. I think it's so much in Indian country we're hearing that there are parallels between the war in Ukraine and sort of the wars that happen to Indian people. Tell us more about what the reaction and the response has been.
Well, I think it hits Indian country, in our hearts when we see the colonial aggression and seek to acquire lands that are being used and occupied by another nation. And so when we see that, we can certainly empathize with both the displacement and the land loss and the change in a way of life. Certainly, for Indian country in the 1800s into the early 1900s, that change happened. And I think probably, a lot of parents in Indian country are explaining to their children, we teach you about, that bullying's not right. And, is might always going to win, which is not usually, shouldn't be the case. But as we watch this play out, it seems the historical parallels that we can see to what has happened in Indian country are certainly there.
One of the other things that has struck me is that in the media, so often we're hearing this word of sovereignty, and it's really made its way into mainstream media. When in Indian country, we talk about sovereignty almost every day.
We do, and that's an excellent point. I thought when I've been hearing it about the sovereignty of a nation, sovereignty of Ukraine, and through the voice of their extraordinary leader, that I thought, well, maybe this is a little bit of an educating moment about the sovereignty of tribes. When we talk about that, it is being demonstrated live in the most dramatic of fashions and referenced by President Zelensky. So yes, that's an excellent parallel.
Sure. Well, I want to switch gears and end on one last topic. I hear there's been some mumblings about some movement on a director of the Indian Health Service. Tell us about what you know at a very high level.
Yes. So it's been, Indian country has been asking the Biden administration, where's our IHS nominee? So there's, the chatter has been ramping up that they're about to announce a nominee. It's been delayed a couple of times. So, and also the conversation about who the candidates might be. And I actually really think that the White House and the administration have been having, a difficult time filling this position. But this is an opportunity for us to underscore that the IHS director is in charge of an $8 billion healthcare system. We need a person who knows how to run a hospital with hospital administration credentials. And, those folks are not going to move to Washington, D.C. and work at a pay scale that is far, far below what mainstream America is going to pay. So we have, I think, the administration has had a lot of difficulty, and there's no value. There are some folks who say, well, let's make sure that we fill that with the absolute best. But when we do not have a Senate confirmed appointee at the table making our case and being the advocate for Indian country during this critical budget season, as the appropriation season goes on, then that is a loss for Indian country. So we have a very capable acting in Elizabeth Fowler, and who's doing a terrific job. But that Senate confirmed appointee, the gravitas that goes with that, the recognition, we need that at the table.
Sure. Well, thank you, Holly.
Yes, thank you, Aaliyah.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.